take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Welcome to Life in Red.
So if 2020 was going like it was supposed to, right now we would be, I think on the second day as we record this into the Olympic Games, just after the opening ceremonies and enjoying some sports on TV. But as we all know, 2020 has not turned out to our hopes. So I'm bringing in the next best thing, the Director of Communications for the Canadian Olympic team, Photi Sotiropoulos. Thank you, sir, so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to be here.
So I guess the first question, I assume you would be in, like I was saying, if it was a normal 2020, you'd be in Japan right now. What are you doing now to fill your time?
That's a really great question. We're actually celebrating our 1 year out from the games at the moment we're recording this podcast. 1 year out to Tokyo 2021. It's keeping its name to Tokyo 2020, however, even though we're going to be doing it next year. What we're doing to occupy our time? Well, we're working on a whole bunch of things. The biggest thing that's currently preoccupying us is getting 2 games ready back to back, right? Because now that Tokyo is going to be in the summer of 2021, we have in the winter of 2022, just 6 months after Beijing happening. And normally that would have been a year apart. So what we've done right now is we split up our team of employees. We have about 100 people working at the COC in Montreal and Toronto offices. And we've split them up into 2 teams, one working on Beijing and the other one working on Tokyo, because that lead up time between the two is no longer there. It's funny because a lot of people kind of ask us that under normal circumstances as well, right? Being the Canadian Olympic Committee, a lot of my friends, I'm not going to name any of them here not to embarrass them, will ask me, well, what the hell do you do between those games, right? Because you have winter and summer games, and then you have like basically a 2-year span that you're basically doing nothing. Are you just like waiting for, are you on vacation? What the hell do you do? And we basically work every year on the games, because one thing that people don't appreciate perhaps is that we work on the summer and winter games, the Olympic Games, but we also work on the Pan American Games that happen in the Americas every 4 years as well. We work on the Youth Olympic Games, both summer and winter. And so literally every year is a games year. And then we prepare for games at least 5 years in advance. So right now, we're preparing for games for Paris 2024, and we're starting conversations with Italy for 2026. And there's also the 2028 games happening in Los Angeles. So we're thinking very long term, and these decisions are very long term. So that's why this is a very long rambling answer. This is why I'm wrapping up here. This is why the idea of the games having been postponed is so incredibly unusual. I'm going to avoid saying the word unprecedented. It's been said way too many times during this pandemic, but it is so freaking unusual that we are in this predicament. You would have asked me in February or March whether I thought this would ever happen, and I would be willing to bet my life savings that this would never happen, but it did. And so what is normal is a question for debate anymore.
Yeah, seriously, it's kind of flipped everything on its head, and then we've gone into 2020 even more, all the different social actions and American politics and Canadian, like everything just seems to snowball, and it all just started with kind of that one night with the NBA. I am curious. Canada was one of the first countries to kind of come out and say, whether you choose to go ahead with the Olympics, Tokyo, we're not going to take part. The health and safety of our athletes is going to be paramount. I'm curious to know, that's a huge decision. Like you said, like you would have bet your life savings on going back in February, and then we come out, end of March, early April with this decision. What what goes into a decision like that? How much conversation are you having? How many people are involved?
That is the very difficult question to answer, because there are so many people involved in such a decision. And you're absolutely right. Canada was the first country to come out and say, we're not going to the games this summer. If the games are going to happen this summer, we're going to bow out, and we're going to find another solution to this, but we're not going there in 2020 of July. And so what happened, I'll try and give you the Coles notes just so that it's not one of those rambling answers, because there's just so many things that happened and so many steps that came along. And I'll summarize it in just saying the decision almost practically happened in the span of 24 hours. And I would say those were the longest 24 hours probably of my entire life, with a tremendous amount of phone calls and meetings that occurred to get to that point. And it started early in the day. It was Sunday. We had a call with our athletes commission, and our president was on that call. And I believe our CEO was also on that call. I was on that call as well. And we were really talking with our athletes commission, and that's a body of athletes that represent all of our Olympians. So they're there to voice the concerns, the ideas, the thoughts of our Olympians, and they're a good representations of who our athletes are. It's chaired by Shea Smith, who's a fantastic Olympian, wonderful all-around human being, quite frankly, and co-chaired by Rosie McLennan, who is an Olympic darling, I would say, a national treasure, I would also dare say, and just a fantastic human being in her own right as well. And so we're on the call with them, and we're having this conversation about what we should be doing. And we're having a conversation as well. On the call is our chief medical officer, Dr. Mike Wilkinson. He's sort of explaining, this is early days. We're maybe week 2, week 3 of our lockdown, and we know that this is becoming a very serious thing. We know that this is, dare I say it again, unprecedented, and we're trying to basically explain to the athletes from a medical point of view and from a health and safety point of view what needs to be done. While that meeting is happening, we get an email, press release by the International Olympic Committee saying that, they're going to need another 4 weeks to decide what happens to the games. And the one thing that they had ruled out for 100% sure was they were not going to cancel them, but they knew that they were either going to postpone them or they were going to hold them during the summer. And what that would look like, they weren't 100% sure yet. And so the conversation then changed and the question changed. And that was a fundamental thing that happened in that moment in time. And the question was no longer whether we should be heading to games, but what do we do during this 4-week period? Do we tell our athletes through our athlete commission that they need to continue training during this period of time because we're not sure whether we're going or not? Or do we tell them stop training and listen to what the directions and the directives of our government and our chief medical officer, Dr. Tam, and our own chief medical officer, Dr. Mike Wilkinson, what they're telling us, which is stay home because you're endangering not only your lives, but you're endangering the lives of your family and friends and your communities and the people that are around you, not to mention the coaches that need to come and help them train and all that sort of stuff. And so when we changed the question as to do we need to continue training or not, it became an obvious answer. The answer is no, we don't want you to continue training because we don't want you to endanger your life or the lives of your family and friends. And so it became really a question of health and safety. And so when we asked that question to the athletes, the answer became apparent. No, we're not going to continue training. Therefore, we're not going to be able to make it to the Olympic Games because we're not going to be ready for the Olympic Games. You can't ask an elite athlete to all of a sudden stop training for a 4-week period or an indeterminate amount of time in order to get to where they get to. And the Olympics is quite frankly the cream of the crop of athletes around the world. So that decision became quite apparent. Then we had to socialize it and explain it to our national sports organizations. We had a whole bunch of calls with them. There's over 100 people on that call, all the governing bodies across Canada of sport. And then we also had conversations with Sport Canada and our government and our board of directors. And this was all done obviously in conjunction with our Canadian Paralympic Committee counterparts, who also were influenced as well and were part of those conversations in coming up with that decision. And late that night on that Sunday, so this is all happening on one day during a 24-period hour, we sent out a press release that we wrote and said, for these reasons, we will not be participating in the games. Australia came out afterwards, several hours after our decision was made. And then the International Olympic Committee, I think within a 48-hour period, then decided that the 4 weeks that they had initially asked to make a decision were no longer needed. And their decision was that the games were going to be postponed. I originally said these were going to be the Coles notes of what happened. It was probably a little bit longer, but you understand the complexity of all of this and how insane the decision-making process was in terms of time. It was probably the toughest thing we've all been part of. Yeah,
that I remember kind of that 2 or 3 weeks before that decision was made, and when we went into lockdown. Here in Ottawa, we had the wrestling kind of qualifying, and I remember a lot of athletes were speaking out about that because they're training and they go to this event that had no fans, and then talking about that training aspect. And I love that entire answer. That was all within 24 hours. That's kind of what I love about finding out about people's jobs, especially at a high level like you're at, because I think most people would think that, you guys just kind of had like a quick meeting and you're like, okay, yeah, we're not going. And then, move on with your lives, put out the press release. And then it's like actually, and you just summed it up in just a couple words when really it was totally wild of the amount of communication you had to go to. I am curious, was there blowback or any controversy with that decision when you released it? In the international community, where people were like, whoa, Canada, what are you doing? Come on.
I'd say that it was received generally quite well by most countries. Obviously you have to put yourself in the shoes of the International Olympic Committee, and being told by one of your countries that they're not going to be going to games is probably not what you want to be hearing. I would assume, and I'm sure that it was perhaps perceived a little bit differently in those circles. Ultimately, though, and I do have to also add the fact that a lot of our athletes, even though they were on board with the decision, were mostly mixed emotions. When you know that in 5 or 6 months from now, you're going to be competing in the biggest sporting event of your life, and you're going to be doing it on the world stage, and you've been training for the past 3-4 years to get to that point, and all of a sudden you're getting an email press release from the Canadian Olympic Committee saying, well, we're putting it on hold for another year. It's probably not the thing that you want to be reading, right? So some of our athletes were devastated by the decision, even though they understood that decision was the right decision to make. And you also have to think of the fact that a lot of these athletes have put their entire lives on hold in order to be able to get to this point. A lot of them have suspended their education, or suspended going to work full time in order to be able to train. And so that's a huge life commitment. And so being told that there's another year that you're going to have to do that is also a difficult thing to hear. Otherwise, there are other athletes that might have deemed themselves too old to compete in 2021. So there's a lot of tremendously mixed emotions around the athlete community, even though we understood and thought that this was the right thing to do, even though there was a tremendous amount of consensus throughout all the stakeholders, all the people that we communicated with thought, yes, this is the right thing to do. So I do want to make sure that I qualify the answer that yes, we all agreed on it, but it wasn't something that we were all necessarily 100% happy with, and still to this day, it's created a tremendous amount of anxiety in some people, and some people have been viewing it as an incredible positive. Penny Olesiak, in a conversation that I listened to her speak, said that this was a great opportunity because it would provide her with an extra year to prepare for the games. So for her, this was a great thing that happened. Well, great thing that happened. It was a good thing that happened, and she chose to see it as a positive rather than a negative. But you can't discount other people's feelings around all of this as well. So internationally, within the first 2 hours, I think, of publishing that press release, I've never seen this in my career. I think I had over 200 media requests from around the world, everywhere from Germany to Australia to New Zealand, England. I think I must have spoken to, I can't even count the number of journalists that I spoke to that evening, well into the early hours, because we sent out the press release, I think it was around 8-9 p.m. And obviously that with the time zones change and difference within different countries, people were waking up to the news, or people were in midday and were getting this news. So it was another 24, 48 hours of just doing interviews with every possible media outlet, and most of them being incredibly complimentary to Canada, seeing Canada as a leader in the world around this particular issue, and praising us. So overwhelmingly positive.
Right. Talking about all these things and getting into more, instead of more of what your actual work is, other than just, putting out the fire of COVID-19, what, saying director of communications and media relations, that's a nice title for a lot of different things that you probably do. Other than, giving out press releases and stuff, what goes into a role like that, and like all the kind of encompassing things that goes into your job?
Well, that's a really good question. I'll tell you, it is so involved and has so many different aspects to it that it's kind of difficult to sort of summarize in just a few words. I usually put it in buckets because it's easier for people to sort of see the different areas in which I operate. First of all, I had a team of 5 amazing communications people in the COC, at the COC, who operate at incredibly high levels and standards. I am in awe of them on a daily basis for what they can achieve and produce. And we have somebody who is responsible on our team for the marketing aspect of our Team Canada brand, and so that person liaises with brand and partnerships and digital to be able to get our message and brand out there to our fans. And so that's one of our main and very important stakeholders, our fans, and how we communicate to them. Then there's the other aspect of it, which is corporate communications, which sounds a little dreary, to be completely honest with you. When you say I work in corporate communications, most people's eyes glaze over. But it's actually quite interesting because it's, developing true and important policy. You could argue that our position to not go to games this summer, or to not withhold a team from going to games, that was a corporate communications decision. As much as it was a health and safety decision, and the way that we communicated that was through our corporate communications channels. And so that was an incredibly important aspect of our work. It's our official position on where we stand on doping internationally. And we have some incredible people within the Canadian Olympic Committee that have such an important, storied, and incredible career around that particular aspect of things. Just think about the Richard McLarens, who came out with the doping report around Russia that was the basis of, or one of the bases of, the Icarus documentary on
Yeah,
Netflix.
fabulous doc.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about Richard Pound, Dick Pound, who has been with the Olympic movement since the late 60s, one of the first presidents of the Canadian Olympic Committee, and the first president of the World Anti-Doping Association, Becky Scott, Olympian, and also on the IOC Commission, and sat on the WADA Commission, and now on Global Athletes. There's a lot of people within Canada that have these really important roles around doping. So that's all corporate communications, and that's another really important aspect of our work. Then I would say we work around what we call IR and PA, so international relations and public affairs. And that's everything that has to do with government relations, everything that has to do with our international community. The International Olympic Committee and the Canadian Olympic Committee is an international organization. And so we deal with a tremendous amount of other countries, with other diplomatic entities. When we go to different countries, we're not a government representative, right? And this is something that a lot of people are not aware of. A lot of people think that their tax money is going towards the Canadian Olympic Committee. We're almost entirely privately funded. 98% of our funding comes from the private sector. And so the dichotomy of that is that because we're not a government entity, we also represent Canada. By de facto, our name is Team Canada, and we wear the Team Canada colors and have the maple leaf on our uniforms and gear and kits. And that in and of itself is an incredibly important representation of who we are as a nation. So when we go to other countries, how we communicate with those other countries is an important aspect of it. And added to that right now is the whole idea of bidding and hosting, and Canada may be getting the games again at some point in the near future. And so that also plays in within the public affairs and international relations side of things. There's internal communications. There's all of the communications that happen with our own employees, with our own staff, and how we communicate all of the internal policies and all of the internal things that human resources come up with our CEO and senior leadership team come up with. And so that is another aspect of it. So we deal with a lot, and the title sounds fancy, and a lot of it is quite, to be honest with you, fun. But there are so many different little aspects and facets of this work that keep us busy on a daily basis. That I don't, this coming back to the original thing. Like, what do you do between games? Do a lot. We do a lot.
And it's amazing that you still have a luscious full head of hair too, because it sounds like
it's white. It's white on the side. You can see it here on the Zoom call, but it's getting whiter and whiter.
I'm always curious, and I do this in my professional life when I'm talking to senior leaders or thought leaders. When you get to kind of a position that you're at with a lot of people reporting to you, a lot of moving parts, like you just gave a description of all the people you kind of have to be in touch with. How do you find work-life balance? Like, how do you kind of make sure that you take care of yourself, that you're ready to go to work and deal with all this? Because as a young person, as a millennial, I think a lot of us struggle with that because we always kind of want to be busy and look like we're busy and feel busy. So, again, the question, like, how do you kind of balance everything to make sure you're performing at a high level?
It's leading by example. If you're going to tell your team that work-life balance is important, you better not be sending them emails after 5 p.m. unless somebody's dying, right? You better be the first one to say, hey, listen, I have a vacation time that I haven't taken. I'm going to be taking it. And you know what? I'm encouraging you to do the same. It's not being a stickler for people who have different working styles and conditions. I've told my team time and time again, I don't care if you're sitting on a lounge chair by the pool, or you're in an office from 9 to 5, or you want to work only between, midnight and 5 in the morning because that's the most productive time for you. You choose your own time. As long as we get the work done, as long as we're having fun working together, I really don't care. I feel that is micromanaging people. I feel like it's like telling people how to work when people have so many different ways of working, and it's so unimportant. Really, it's not really important. What we care about is being world leaders. It's producing world-class events. It's comparing ourselves to the best of the best out there and setting the bar even higher. And that's what I want my team to be concerned about. I don't really want them to be concerned about whether they, it's okay for them to take a half day off because they're not feeling well that day, or because, I don't want them to feel that there are any repercussions if they don't meet certain specific requirements and don't show up on our daily morning meetings. And quite frankly, I've had to adapt, and part of what I have to do as a leader is adapt to my team, even though some of the things that they want might not necessarily be congruent with what I want. And so, so one of the things that we've been looking at right now is, we work incredibly hard. We work long hours. We work very stressful files and things. And so one of the things that we're trying to do more and more is like, how do we socialize in all this? How do we keep in contact, and how do we keep sane? Like, normally we would, have a team dinner, or we would do an offsite, or we would go on some sort of fun little thing to sort of distract ourselves. We would go to a conference together somewhere fun and exciting and interesting, and get to interact with other people. And we don't have any of that anymore. So we're trying to find ways of doing that, and we're trying to really be creative in how we do that. So, don't take my word for it. Ask my team, because you're obviously getting one side of the story. My team might have a completely opposite opinion of all of this, but I think we're operating really well, and I think it's bringing the right energy, and that's a little bit tough, because not everybody, not every morning is a morning where I'm like 100% and I'm ready to go. But you need to force yourself, because you need to know that there's other people that are relying on you. And so I hope that answers the question in some way, but I think that's the key to it. It's leading by example, and bringing your best self, and then also bringing your criteria in terms of boundaries, right? If somebody on my team emails me, I'll respond, but I will, after hours. But if I don't think that it is something that is, we're not saving lives. I keep reminding our team that, but if there's nothing that is going to explode or somebody's going to die, you can take another 24 hours to get back to me. Right?
Right. That's funny. That's what we always see. Yeah, we're not curing cancer. When something happens, you make a mistake. It's at the end of the day, we're not doctors. We're having fun, and we're in an important business, but you always got to put some things into perspective when it comes to what your work is. So I took communications in university a bit before I dropped out for a full-time job. A lot of people just get into communications because, I don't know, I think it's kind of a very broad field, and no one really, you get in it, you don't really know where it's going to take you, but it's a degree, and people start it. I'm curious to get to a spot like you're at. I'm curious on kind of like your journey and where you've ended up in your career, because I'm sure it's not linear, that you just started at the Olympic Committee and just you were intern, and then you were the this, that, and then all of a sudden you were director. Take me through a little bit of your journey of how you ended up here.
Oh, that's a good one. I've much like I think you in your and I'd like to get to know a little bit more about you, actually, because your journey is quite interesting as well. But I think, like a lot of people in this field, I was very interested with radio and television production at a very early age, and I knew that this was something I wanted to do at some level. I knew my parents at the same time were very discouraged by that idea, because it wasn't really what their plans were of me either becoming a doctor or a lawyer. And so I had to convince them. I had to say, like, no, this is actually what I want to do. I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't want to be a doctor. The sight of blood really gets me a little weak in the knees, and I don't think anybody in the medical profession wants that
Yeah.
as or that trait in their doctor. So if you're fainting every time you see blood, your patients are not probably going to be very confident in your abilities. So communications was what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do radio for some reason. I know that radio for me was something really magical. I listened to radio as a child, and I had my headphones, and late at night, and I would listen to it and would try and catch on the shortwave other radio stations from far away. And it was better at night because you can get those signals at night. This is pre-internet, right? And so I really enjoyed that. I loved listening to people's voices and how intimate it was, and how they could sort of whisper, and it almost felt like they were talking to you directly. And the idea that radio didn't require a tremendous amount of technical equipment or things like you literally could do it by yourself in a booth, press a button and turn on your mic and talk to people, and then have an immediate response. So you could give out a phone number and people could call in and then have an interaction with them. There was some immediacy with them. Mm-hmm. And so I started doing a whole bunch of radio programming by myself with others. I did community radio a lot in Montreal growing up. I think I kind of joked at the time that I did every community radio station you could possibly find in the greater Montreal area, and in both French and English. And then studied communications, much like you. Remember graduating from my communications degree and thinking to myself, what the hell am I now? Like, I'm a communicologist, which is what exactly, right? Like, how does a communicologist get a job in this world? And so naturally I thought, okay, we're going to continue this studying thing because I'm not ready to go for a job at this moment in time. Continue doing I started working on a master's degree in education, which was a completely different thing, but kind of related. One thing led to another. So while I was doing all of this, I was volunteering to radio stations. I got a couple of gigs doing camera, being a camera operator for television. And I can get into another story with how I got a camera and all that sort of stuff, but that's for another time perhaps. One thing led to another. And at that time, when I was doing my master's degree, my husband told me, we weren't married at the time. No, we weren't. So he told me that there was a job opening at the NHL, and he was a huge hockey fan. I wasn't as much of a hockey fan as he was. So I sort of applied to it, and a few weeks later, I got a phone call, and I remember being a little bit weird because it was in the evening, and I answered the phone, and this nice woman on the phone says, "Hi, I'm calling you from the National Hockey League. How are you today?" And I said, "Oh, I really have no time for surveys right now. It's dinner time." And she's like, "No, this isn't a survey. You applied to a job with us." And I thought to myself, I had to think about it for half a second because it was sort of like so not like me to apply to the NHL. I thought, oh yeah, that's right. Yes, I did apply for a job with you guys. And she says, well, your resume is interesting and you have all these cross-functional areas in your CV, and we'd be interested in meeting with you. And that whole thing was a fluke. Like, I would have never applied to it had my husband not sort of directed me to it. And this sort of first job, I got a whole bunch of interviews and went through them. And I think part of it was the fact that I almost in the back of my head knew that they weren't going to get me for this job. I was like, nobody ever hires you for the NHL. So as a Canadian kid, you kind of were like, whatever. Yeah. So I kind of went to those interviews with kind of not nonchalant, but kind of like, if this happens, if it doesn't happen, doesn't happen. And it happened, and I got the job, and that first job changed the course of my entire career. So I suddenly had a purpose. I knew that I wanted to work in sport because the NHL just really was this fantastic place. It was cool. It was really, really, really cool. I enjoyed every moment of it. I worked on the All-Star game in Montreal, and was the All-Star location manager, which meant that I did a whole bunch of stuff, including organizing volunteers for the All-Star game and creating, helping with communications collateral and doing a whole bunch of other things there. And that led me to a career in sport, which then led me to a job at the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, which is part of the Canadian Hockey League, which encompasses the W, the O, and the Q, and worked there as in communications. And that brought me here. That brought me to this job. I'm skipping a whole bunch of steps because I've already realized that I've digressed several times in my conversation as to that very simple question. But it's 90% of it was being at the right place at the right time, and 10% of it I might be selling myself short, but I think 10% of it is talent. The rest was really being at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, it's funny. I interview a lot of radio kids coming into getting a job at the street team, the promo crew, and a lot of the guys, like, sports is always the dream. Everyone kind of gets into radio, and they're like, no, I want to be on sports radio, or even myself, like I've always fancied a career in sports communications. My favorite hockey team is the Detroit Red Wings, and I've tried reaching out to the communications director there just for shits and giggles, but like you kind of landed in that dream field for a lot of young broadcasting professionals, especially men, that sports is kind of like the all-encompassing dream job, and the pride to be like, I work for the NHL, I work for the COC. It's cool.
It's really cool in cocktail parties.
Yeah, no kidding, eh? I love that you brought up the fact about your husband, because one of the things I did want to ask you about, and especially in today's climate, is diversity and inclusion, and all that in sport, because that's a big topic. I'm curious to know your perspective on why diversity and inclusion, whether it's about race or sexual orientation or gender, is really important in sport. Because you get a lot of people, especially on social media, which is a whole thing, and I reference it a lot on the podcast, but it's, don't bring politics into sports. Don't, keep sports. What's your perspective on why diversity and inclusion on Pride and Black Lives Matter, why that's so important in sport?
You know what? I think that is an excellent question, and one that not enough people are asking themselves around this particular issue. Sport has an ability to bring people together like very little else can, right? So what's interesting about sport is that if you are a Senators fan, if you're in Ottawa, or you're a Habs fan in Montreal, or you're a Maple Leafs fan, God forbid, in Toronto, you are part of this community. And the fans that go to those games and cheer for those teams, they cheer because they have a common goal, a commonality amongst them. And what's fascinating is that rich and poor, educated and uneducated, black and white, all come together and congregate for the same reason. And there's not a lot of things in life that create that sense of community. And sport is a microcosm of the world, of our society. If you think of moments in sport history, a lot of them have to do with how one person within a team was able to change perceptions and was able to bring and move the needle forward a little bit. when you think of how people react even to this day, and how people use, if you are looking at the LGBTQ plus community, if you're thinking of how, homophobic language is still used today on the field of play, or how the fact that, you in many cases, and this still happens to this day, there are racist remarks that are made on the field of play as well, and it's all part of, quote unquote, to psych out your opponent, or to try and get into their head, and to try and get them to play a bad game. Those are things that still exist, and things that we need to eradicate, because that's not what sport is about. Sport is about a set of rules, and playing by those rules for a common purpose. And it's the reason why all these people, all these fans congregate and cheer for a team. And so that's why it's important. That's why diversity and inclusion is important in sport, because when you get a large facet of the population cheering for a team, the idea that the people that are on that team are representative of your society, and you're really cheering for the representation of your society, is a very powerful thing for me. And I think that's why it's really important to push for those things. It's really important to have representation in terms of BIPOC communities within sport, BIPOC representation within boards of directors that make decisions in sport. That's why it's important to have LGBTQ representation. That's why it's important to have gender equity and representation when you're making all these decisions, because the only right thing is that what you have on the field of play, if it is truly a microcosm, is representative of the society you live in. And if it's not, then there's something that we're doing wrong. And I think that's where my thought process is.
When I must have been 12, 13, I got called up to the rep team, and the whole team picked on me and called me gay. Now, back then, it wasn't even that long ago, but that was a big thing for a young straight boy to be called gay. You didn't want to be called that. I'm from a small town, so there wasn't a lot of education or talking about that certain subject. But the way I got them to stop was by beating one of the kids up. Now, I don't advocate for that, but I'm curious, now that we've progressed in society a lot, but we still do not see, an out athlete in one of the major league sports. And I see reports all the time that, the majority of sports players would support a player on that team, though, even though we reference that they use, that homophobic language. I'm curious, from your point of view, how do we go about really changing that culture that, it's not just what we say, but what we do? Like, how do we go about changing that and really promoting that fact of LGBT specifically in sport?
That's going to be a tough one. I mean, it's through different organizations. I would argue, like, You Can Play. It's through different people. If you're thinking of hockey specifically, Brock McGillis is somebody I've worked with and know quite well, who's done a tremendous amount of work in that space. It's pushing boundaries and challenging people. Part of me still thinks that because of the nature of hockey, it's going to be very difficult, and most likely will probably be one of the last sports where you have an out gay professional player that's in the NHL and is going to be, and this is something that was interesting, because I didn't actually remark on this. It was actually my husband who was telling me this, and that made complete sense to me when I started thinking about it. unlike other sports, if you think of basketball or football, those sports are very much based on the individual, even though they're team sports, right? So like you have superstars on a team, and they all have very big personalities, and each one has their own personality and their own following. Hockey is very much still a sport where there's no I in team, and where if you are different in any way, you're either ostracized or you're told that you're not fitting the mold, and you're drawing too much attention to yourself. And that's part of the hockey, I guess, culture, if you will. It's part of the way that we view that particular sport. Mildly Canadian, I guess, in some respects, where it's all about the collective and not about the individual, which is a lovely idea in and of itself. But perhaps that is also its own fault, right? That's probably also why I feel that might be one of the few last sports that are going to be okay, or will be okay with it. Somebody, I think of I can't think of a big personality in sport, that in hockey specifically. The one that comes to mind is PK Subban. At the time with the Montreal Canadiens, who really was like that bigger than life personality. The media loved him. He knew how to speak to a camera and to an audience and to his fans, and was very approachable. And he really was not. He was the person that was not part of the team. He was the person that drew too much attention to himself. Now, you can argue for a whole bunch of reasons as to why he was traded, but a lot of people still think to this day that the reason why he was traded was because he drew way too much attention to himself, which was not what the ethos of being of a part of the hockey team is all about. So I think there's a little bit of work to be done around that, and a little bit of work to be done around changing that perception. And you know what will happen is that the sky will not have fallen once we know that there's a gay hockey player that's playing in the NHL. There's bound to be one right now. And they're probably living a really horrible life because they can't be their true, authentic self. And when that person does come out officially, the sky will not have fallen, the world will not have stopped turning, and nobody's life will have been ruined as a result of it. And perhaps, it's going to take one brave soul to do that and change and be a pioneer. It's funny to think about this. It's funny to think that in 2020, we're still waiting for a pioneer in hockey. And so we'll hopefully cross our fingers and hope that it happens within our lifetime. The one thing I'm very encouraged about is that within my own lifetime, I've seen so much change within this. I grew up knowing that I was never going to get married, right? Having that thought in my head as a child and thinking, well, one day I'll have to talk to my parents about the fact that I won't be able to get married. And it's going to devastate them. It's going to break their hearts. And it's going to, all these ideas and plans that they had for me are not going to materialize. And within my own lifetime, we went from police officers raiding gay bars and imprisoning gay people as pedophiles to gay marriage, I should just say, being deemed legal for gay couples. And that's in and of itself tremendously encouraging, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I see I would say even the last 5 years now. I'm really big in mental health, and I do personal speaking and advocacy and everything. The past 5 years, not only in all the negatives that we kind of talk about, whether we're the divisiveness of politics and all that, but everything's kind of really accelerated at a rapid pace. Whether it's LGBTQ issues, mental health, there just seemed to be a rapid progression in society. And I think social media is a big part of that. Everyone who didn't have a voice now has a voice, which I think is huge. And I always reference that we seem to think that these conversations are just coming out of the blue, when really they've been happening forever. We just hear about them now thanks to social media and YouTube and videos and podcasts and everything, right? So it's good. And like I know it's 2020 and we're still waiting, but I'm really encouraged by the fact that everything seems to be progressing at a rapid rate. So it is good news. Transitioning on the spot of hockey, the CBA just came out with, the Olympics, Team Canada and the NHL players, they're going to be allowed to participate in the Olympics, assuming that they go ahead and get COVID under control. Does that really change things for the COC and your role, especially coming up in the Winter Games? Like, does that drastically change how you do things and proceed with the games?
You mean the fact that NHL players are going to be able to participate? Well, you know what? There was so much talk around Pyeongchang specifically because we didn't have NHL players in Pyeongchang, and the questions were about, will Canadians be interested in hockey if NHL players aren't part of it? And you know what? My answer to that was, well, Canadians aren't really interested on a yearly basis with luge, and yet they watch it during the games. Canadians don't necessarily watch speed skating year-round, but they watch it during the games. To me, what happens is that once an athlete dons a maple leaf on their chest or on their shoulder and wears that maple leaf to represent their country, it really doesn't matter as much whether they are an NHL player or they're not an NHL player. What matters is that we're cheering for them. The best example of it was during the final women's game at Sochi, where the entire country stopped what they were doing. The entire country just stopped. Like, you could hear a pin drop in Canada when the women's team was competing during that final and won gold. And it was a moment that brought us all together, and yet none of them were NHL players. And so to me, it's how compelling the team is that's on the ice, rather than if they are part of a franchise and one of those big stars. Obviously, the star power and the storytelling and all that sort of stuff, it feeds television stations, it feeds a whole bunch of other things, and obviously there's an interest there from a commercial point of view. But I'm just distilling it to its essence. I was there and was trying not to tear up too much when I was watching the final game with the men's in Pyeongchang at Canada Olympic House, where we ended up not winning. The Americans won, but a truly proudly Canadian moment where after the win, the Canadians that were all in Canada Olympic House, and there were some Americans as well who were very inclusive, they applauded at the end. And even though we were all devastated that we lost, the applause were in recognition of a game well played. And I couldn't have been prouder to be a Canadian at that moment in time, because it was truly a beautiful moment. It was a moment of showing sportsmanship and what being a true Canadian is.
Yeah, I'm glad you referenced that 2014 game with the women's, because to this day, that is one of my favorite hockey games, if not the greatest. It really comes down to 2010 with the men's team and that game, but my heart skipped a beat. Even you talking about it, I got goosebumps because I was just thinking back to the post and Marie-Philippe Poulin. Like, yeah, that was just a wild game. And you're totally right. That wasn't NHL. That wasn't, that was just Olympic athletes giving it all. And I think back to Alexander Bordeaux or John Montgomery or, referenced, Rosie McLennan, like these Penny Alexiak, all these, they're not household names until the Olympics, and then they become superstars. And it's just because we all love sport and we all love cheering on our country.
They're amazing. Like, watching these Olympians are just, you're in complete awe. Like, I was at the figure skating competition with Scott and Tessa, and watching them on the ice. I was just praying. I was decked out in Canada gear, and I was just praying that, as the cameras swooped to sort of showcase the Canadians that are cheering for the Canadian. I was just praying that the camera wasn't going to land on me, because I was just in tears the entire time. I was sobbing. I was trying, like, thinking, like, okay, this is not normal. I should not be having this insane reaction to figure skating, but I was, because A, was so beautiful, and B, they're just what Canada is all about. Both of them are just amazing human beings, lovely people. Having interacted with them on many occasions and worked with them when we named them as flag bearers, opening flag bearers for the Pyeongchang Games, are just so awesome. And I have so many wonderful, beautiful memories of both of them. So I you cheer for the people, but you also cheer for the country, and that's what's truly amazing and special about the Olympics.
Absolutely. Now, I could talk to you for hours, I swear, but I know you got work to do, and I got to get back to work too. But I would be remiss for the fact, because I find communication so fascinating, and I love learning about crisis management. And this is something I'm learning in my own career, with putting out statements. And, my question is, and it's going to refer to, the Black Lives Matter movement and George Floyd. There was a lot of pressure on brands from across all the scopes of society to put out a statement. And I'm really curious, from your point of view, what goes into putting out a statement? Because sometimes there's a lot of controversy that, the statement didn't really say anything, it was just, a lawyer did it. You see that on social media a lot. How do you go about putting a statement out where you want to be true and authentic, but you also, as a PR professional, have to be diplomatic and, I guess, proper? I don't know if that's the right word.
It is all about pushing and pulling, I think, in many instances. Without getting into too much detail about that particular statement, that situation was a tough one. A tough one because you're dealing with a lot of people's biases and a lot of people who have different opinions, and you need to find some middle ground. So you ultimately, as a communications professional, where you need to land, and the whole process is trying to get everybody to land in the same place. And sometimes you don't. And what you have to kind of think about is that when you're representing an organization as large as the Canadian Olympic Committee, that is many thousands of athletes strong and hundreds of employees, and it's hard to get to a space where everybody is in agreement of what they ought to say. A lot of it has to do with strong leadership, and thankfully we have that at the COC. A lot of our leadership is tremendously strong and tremendously experienced. When you think of our CEO, David Shoemaker, formerly the CEO of NBA in China. He started the NBA in China. He was the president of the Women's Tennis Association. He's had an incredibly impressive career, and is, quite frankly, one of the truly smartest and strongest leaders I have had the pleasure of working under. When you think of somebody like Tricia Smith, our president, who is, just thinking of her pedigree, a 4-time Olympian, a silver medalist, a recipient of the Order of Canada, a lawyer, the vice president of the International Rowing Federation. She is an IOC member. She's just like, just speaking to her is an intimidating thing. And she's such a humble person and doesn't let you be intimidated by her, even though she has this like 10-page resume of titles and accolades. And you have those people at your helm. You can really steer the boat in the right direction a lot of the time. Other times, I'll tell you, it's difficult to come up with a statement, and I'm going away from the Black Lives Matter issue to other statements, because what ends up happening is that you have information that you can't necessarily share for a whole bunch of reasons, either for legal reasons or for privacy reasons. You can't share that information. And where you might sound like you're coming out with a weak statement, the perception at least from the perception of the public that's reading it, it's all you can say given those circumstances, because you know things that are going to come out later on. And that's always very tough, because you have to kind of defend those decisions, even though you know that people are mad at you because you haven't gone far enough, or you haven't said enough, or you haven't been, and you're like, oh, if you just wait another week or if you wait another month, you'll understand why we're saying what we're saying. And then you have all the conspiracy theorists in that whole spectrum of people. So then you also have to contend with those, and the fact that so it's not a tough place to be. And a lot of my job, I feel, is being a mediator between where I want to take something and and where our lawyers and other people that are informing how a decision is made are pulling back and telling me, no, you can't go there. And what's nice is that most of the time we land where we need to land, but the process is fun. I'll be completely honest with you. I'm invigorated by the process because it's intellectually stimulating, and it's like looking at a problem through so many different angles. It's so cool. And hopefully at the end of the day, when you're judged by history, you're looking back and you're like, well, okay, I didn't do a bad job there.
Listen, you've given me so much time. I truly, truly appreciate getting the chance to talk with you and pick your brain. I always give a chance to give a plug. I don't know if you had social media you want to plug or have any final inspirational words. I'll give the mic to you, though.
Be kind to people. I think that's the only thing I can say that's inspirational at this very, very moment. And plugs. You know what? I'm trying to disconnect from social media as much as I can. But you can follow me. I'm always open to more followers. It's good to my ego and boosts me at my ego a little bit. So I've been an early adopter. The two main platforms I use is Instagram and Twitter. And on both of them, I am at Photi, Photi. So I have an easy sort of name for that. But you know what? You've gained a fan as well. I've been listening to your podcasts. I'm tremendously impressed and very interested in all of your guests, and so I've been doing my homework and been listening to a lot of them, and have been thoroughly entertained and informed by a lot of the work that you're doing. So kudos to you, and please to keep up doing what you're doing. It's important and interesting work.
Well, you can't see me blush because of my ginger beard, but that means so much to me. Thank you so much, everyone. And then watch the Olympics when it comes out next year, obviously, because it's great. Photi Sotiropoulos, cheers, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.